Hi there, and welcome to this lecture. In this video, we will explore loops in Perl. So, what is a loop? Well, loop is a very similar to the conditional statement principle we looked at before. However, instead of running the code once in a conditional statement, the code in the loop will be executed multiple times, while the expression in the beginning of the loop evaluates to true. Let's look at different loops in Perl and some examples on how to use them. Now, the first loop we're going to look at is the while loop. You construct your while loop by typing while, opening and closing parentheses, and then opening and closing curly brackets. As you might have guessed, you put your expression inside the parentheses, as with a conditional statement. Now here you could say something like, while 2 is larger than 1, we want to print hello world. If I run this now, this is actually going to cause infinite loop because this while condition is always going to pass, meaning it's going to print hello world all the time to the console. Now let's add a condition which is going to tell us when the while loop should stop running. For example, let's introduce a variable as before, test equals 1. And here we could say while test is less than 10, we want to print out hello world. Now let's add the test variable here as well. If I save this, run the script, looks like we're actually causing infinite loop. And the reason is because we are never actually incrementing the test variable, which is causing the while loop to run indefinitely. So what we could do, as we saw before, we could use this post increment with plus plus. So meaning every single time we're going to hit the while loop, we're going to print hello world and our variable test, and then we're going to increment the test variable by 1. And this is going to run while test is less than 10. If we save this, run our code again, we're going to see hello world and our variable value printed afterwards. So this runs 9 times while the test is less than 10. And you can add different kind of expressions which need to evaluate the true while some sort of condition is not met. And once our condition is met, you can exit the while loop. In this case, we're using a test variable which we're incrementing while it's less than 10. But your case could be different. Now another loop we could use is the for loop. And it's very similar to while loop, meaning we have to give it a condition that needs to evaluate for the loop to run, knows when to exit. However, the difference is here we provide init variable followed by the expression that needs to evaluate the true for the loop to run, and then we need to provide a handle of how our initial variable should be incremented or decremented for expression to keep running. Let's look at some examples such as say hello, a test variable, and save this. And now let's replace the blocks that we need to initialize in order for loop to run. So we could say my test starting value equals 0. Then the expression could be while test is less than 10. And the handle could be test plus plus. So we're initializing a test variable to 0. We're running the loop while the test variable is less than 10. And afterwards we're incrementing test variable by 1. We save this, run our script, we're going to see value of 0 printed up to the 9. And you can of course reverse this by subtracting a value, then checking while the value is less than x, or similar cases. Now another loop in Perl we're going to look at is called for each loop. And for each loop basically goes through every single element in the given list. And once it reaches the last element, is going to stop the execution. For example, we could say for each my item, and then we could provide a list. And very similar to previous cases, we're going to say hello, and we're going to print out item, save this. And another thing we need to do, we need to define the list. So I'm going to say that my list is going to hold values from 1 till 10. And we saw in our previous lectures that what this basically does, these two dot symbols, is going to construct a list by populating the items from 1 till 10. So it's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. If I save this, run our script, I'm going to see an items printed to the console. So what the for each loop did, it went through every single item which we declared in local scope inside the list, and it printed out in the loop. Now, word of warning here, if you're coming from other programming languages, you might expect that when you're iterating through a list and you're modifying item in place, it's going to modify a copy of an item in that list. In Perl, this is not the case. When you're modifying an item in a loop, it's actually going to modify the item in the given list. So what I mean by that is, for example, if we said for each my item, I could say item equals item plus 1, which could also be written as plus equals 1. If we print this out, we're going to see 2, 3, 4, 10, 11, because now every single item is incremented by 1. However, if we exit the for each loop and we print out via dumper or list by referencing it, because it's going to give us a nicer structure, if we rerun the script, forgot to add the semicolon, if we rerun our script again, we're going to see that here we go. We printed out 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, and so on because we incremented an item in the loop. However, afterwards, once we printed our list, all the items on our list actually changed. So in our original list, we had items from 1 till 10. Then we incremented that item by 1 inside the loop, and this changed the items in place in the list we were working with. So just a word of warning, whenever you're working with loops and you're modifying values, just remember that you're modifying the values in the list. Now, another useful thing you can do with the loops, you can nest them. For example, if we introduce a new list, let's call it nested, and we're going to add only 2 items here. It's going to be 1 and 2. And let's go inside our for each loop. Let's remove this addition. And now let's go through our nested loop items. So I'm going to say for each my nested item, the list of nested items, I'm going to print something with \t or tab so that we can better see it in the console. I'm going to say nested, and I'm going to print out the nested item. If I save this, go to the terminal, run the script. Let's remove this dumper so we have a better visibility. Let's rerun our script. What we're going to see now is that we have hello1, and afterwards we have nested printed out hello2 and nested 1 and 2. So what happens here is that we go through each item in the list, starting with 1, and in every iteration we're running an inner loop, and that inner loop goes through all the items in this array called nested. So we hit the first item, then we go through 1, 2 that we can see in the terminal here. Then we go to the second item, which is in the main loop, and we go through all the items which are in the inner loop, so on and so on. And you can nest many loops as you want. Just do be careful because the behavior can become quite unpredictable if you have many nested loops. It will become very hard to follow the logic very quickly. You might find yourself in scenarios where you actually want to exit a loop, or you maybe want to skip to the next item. And for this, Perl has some couple of keywords to control your loops. These keywords are next, last, redo, and go to. Let's take a look at the next keyword. So for example, we can introduce something like next if or item equals 2. So if we save this, rerun our script, and if you look at the output, what we're going to see is that we printed out the main loop and the nested loop statements. However, when we went to the second loop item, which holds a value of 2, we did print out the hello item from the main loop. However, we did not print items in a nested loop. And this is because we used next keyword and the control statement of if, as we saw in previous lectures, that says go to the next iteration if the current item we're iterating has a value of 2. So the execution which followed afterwards never happened. You can also use a keyword such as last. As the name implies, you might figure out that this keyword simply ends the loop by saying that this is the last iteration we want to execute. So if we save this, go to our terminal, let's clear it up, rerun our code, we're going to see that we went through the first item and also through the nested loop. However, once we hit the second item, we printed out the first statement because it's before the last keyword, but we never get around the for each inner loop. And this is because we said that we want this to be the last iteration if the value of the item equals 2. We can also use a keyword redo, and again, as the name implies, it's going to redo the same loop if the item value matches of what we're looking for. If I clear the console, rerun the script with Perl script.pl, oh, this is actually going to result in infinite loop. And the infinite loop occurred because we printed out the first item that had a value of 1, then we went to the next item which has a value of 2, and we say redo this loop if value equals 2. Now since we're redoing this loop and the value is always 2, this causes infinite loop. Now what we could do here, we could increment item by 1. Save this, rerun our script, and what we're going to observe here is that we actually printed 1, then we incremented item by +1, and that means it now holds a value of 2. So we redid the loop, however, the value now is 3, meaning this statement executed, it redid the loop, since the value now is 4, we actually never print out the nested loop. So we skipped this part by incrementing item by 1, redoing the loop with incremented value, and moving to the next item in the list. Now there's also this keyword goto. For this to be executed, we will need to talk about named loops. And basically what named loops are, you can add this keyword before your loop in uppercase, such as loop 1, followed by colon. And then we can say loop 2. Now what we could do here, instead of printing hello, actually let's leave the printing of hello, but before this printing of the outer loop, let's add the statement that's going to say go to loop 2 if item equals 1. We save this, rerun our code, and let's observe the results. What we're going to see now is that we do have hello2 printed out to the console and the nested loop afterwards. However, in this scenario, which is the first one where the value is 1 in the main loop, we don't have anything printed that says hello1. And this is because we're saying if the item value in the first iteration equals 1, or well, in any iteration for that matter, we want to stop the execution which is in between the goto statement and the loop which you're saying go to, and just execute the next loop. And named loops are quite handy when you're using nested loops. You can apply these names for keywords as next or last if you want to be specific which exactly loop you're referring to. So what I mean by that is if we remove this part, let's leave the say hello item which is in our main loop, and let's go to the inner loop. And after printing nested, I'm going to say last loop 1 if item equals 1. We save this, rerun our code, we're going to see hello1 printed, then nested1 printed, and that's it. And this is because, again, we went through the main loop, we printed item 1 here, then we go into second loop, we print the first item in the nested loop, but then we say last loop, which is named 1 and refers to the outer loop, if the item value is 1. Since the first item in the list has a value 1, then that's it, we're done with the execution. So named loops are quite handy if you want a granular control of the loop execution when you have nested loops. This is it for this video. We looked at loops in Perl and how you can apply them in practice. I hope you found this video useful, and I'll see you at the next one.